Thank you for this opportunity to present on the produce safety rule portion of the Food Safety Modernization Act. You will see that as we go through these slides and I give you an overview of what this program is, you're going to see much similarity with what Teresa has just shared regarding the LGMA, because much of the LGMA was used as a role model when developing the produce safety rule of FSMA. And I'll be talking about the 2006 outbreak involving spinach and so forth, which really was a catalyst to the industry and to the regulatory environment about produce safety, and eventually evolved not only into the private industry with the two LGMAs, but also with the development of the produce safety rule and its timeline and where we are today and for the past 3 years actually that we've been working on this. And as we go along here, if there are questions, I cannot see the chat at this time, so please don't hesitate to enter something into the chat, and our moderators can convey your questions to me regarding that. As my introduction said, I've been with the Arizona Department of Agriculture for about 3 years now, and it was really a new environment from me, or for coming out of the grocery industry, but I was actually very pleased to see the correlations and similarities between each of the programs in private industry and the grocery business. It was like, for example, training your employees is so crucial, and training within the produce safety rule is a key component. Also, cleaning and sanitation of equipment, there's a huge crossover there as well, along with the avoidance of cross-contamination. So just to give you a little bit more information that I do not have in this slide presentation, in the produce safety rule group that is under the citrus, fruit, and vegetable division with the Arizona Department of Agriculture. Many of you probably know Mr. Ed Foster, our assistant director, and Teresa Lopez is one of the CAP manager along with our program manager, Danielle Runyon, who provide oversight to the produce safety rule. Myself and one other trainer, Mr. Michael Brown, we work together with our stakeholders. Michael and I are on the side of training and consultation, and we also have staff of currently one inspector, and we're down one inspector right now, but we're gearing up to get 2 inspectors, one based in Phoenix and one in Yuma, Arizona. So we have a nice complement of staff, and we do go statewide, except for tribal areas. We do not have jurisdictions with the independent nations and so forth. I'll give you a really high overview of the Food Safety Modernization Act, but specifically going into what is the produce safety rule itself. Our role at the Arizona Department of Agriculture. Teresa did touch base about the importance of leafy green and vegetable safety. We'll talk about that, and I really need to let you know who this rule applies to, because there are exceptions to the rule, specifically for commodities and also the size of the farm and so forth, and touch base on the key elements of the rule, and where we are at as far as milestones to date, and at the end provide some question and answers. The produce safety rule, if you look at the FSMA, is just one piece of the FSMA pie, as we like to call it. And Arizona Department of Agriculture only deals with the produce safety rule. There are other aspects of FSMA, such as the mitigation of intentional adulteration. And that's where registered food facilities that are registered with FDA have to develop plans that assess contamination vulnerabilities, and they have to have a documented mitigation strategy for those vulnerabilities. There's also transportation of not only human food, but also animal food. Those are new requirements for companies that actually transport food, including shippers, receivers, loaders, and carriers, whether those carriers be long haul, rail, air, etc. There's also a portion of FSMA that has to do with foreign supplier verification. And with foreign supplier, importers have to verify that their global suppliers comply with FDA regulations. The produce that comes into the United States must meet our standards, that as if it were produced here in the US. There's also a section about accredited third-party certification, and those are certification bodies that administrate voluntary consultation and regulatory audits to aid companies and to help prepare them for regulatory audits or achieve certain certifications, such as GFSI, Global Gap, those types of things. There's also preventive controls for human food, and again, applies to registered facilities, and they have to have written plans that identify hazards and preventative controls for those hazards. And the same applies for preventive controls for food for animals as well. So, but my focus today is on the produce safety rule, because that is our mission. So the technical name or official name of the produce safety rule, which is found in 21 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 112, is the standards for growing, harvesting, packing, and holding of produce. And the rule is much like, you'll see the similarity with LGMA. It's science-based standards, and these are science-based minimum standards. And this is the first time in decades where a law has come into place involving produce in particular. As I said, our stakeholders are the growers, the harvesting companies, which are not always, many of them are independent, and some of these companies have both. They're vertically integrated. They may grow, they may harvest, they may pack, if they may outsource some of these services well. So when it comes to packing, the two common methods here in the state of Arizona is either hand harvest with a lot of products, such as your leafy greens and melons and so forth, but there's a lot of mechanical harvesting as well. And so the rule applies to both types of harvesting as well. And also when it comes to packing, there's a lot of field packing where it's, there's no further steps to it. It's just directly harvested and boxed and packed and shipped right out of the field. And of course, there's a lot of cold holding facilities where the warmth from the harvested leafy greens and so forth will go to cooling operations where they have huge hydro coolers or forced air type coolers. And they cool these raw agricultural commodities, or RACs, as we refer to them. And the rule really is prevention oriented versus trying to do something after the fact, after a outbreak has occurred. And in our teaching courses that we have with the produce safety rule, we really focus heavily on getting those growers and harvesters to think about their risk assessments of the practices that they do, and what can they do to mitigate those microbial risks. We also touch base on physical risks and also chemical risks to a lesser degree, because the outbreaks have predominantly been with microbial risk, but we don't want to overlook those other types of risk as well. And of course, the whole intent is to prevent needless illness and hospitalizations, and of course, the worst case scenario, someone to perish. So this law was actually signed into law in January of 2011 under the Obama administration. It's kind of had a long road, if you will. A couple years later in 2013, and for a 3-year period there, went for public comment in the rulemaking process. And the final rule wasn't published until 2016. And in 2017 was when we started building our own capacity here within the state of Arizona with our program, bringing on a program manager, also the 2 instructors, or such as myself, and program managers, etc., and gearing up our program here in the state. And that same year, we started collecting what we call a farm inventory. Up until this point, the state of Arizona did not have a registry of farms in the state of Arizona. There was no requirement for a grower to register with a centralized database, if you would. There were some mismatched types of databases that we could use to identify farms, whether it be Dun & Bradstreet. We could also use pesticide applicators licenses, but we even went out to farmers markets and talked to the farmer market managers and the people who were selling at the farmers markets to identify who they are and how they fit into the produce safety rule. And that's something that continues to this day, is developing and building that farm inventory. That same year in 2017 is when we started our grower training classes as well. These are not classes about how to grow. The farmers are the experts on how to do that. The Produce Safety Alliance, along with Cornell University, put together a training course, and we facilitate it with our partners at the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension. They have staff that work very closely with us and are excellent partners in our grower training program. In 2018, we started a consultation service to farms that would be inspected under the rule. And this consultation is a free service that we provide that is called the On-Farm Readiness Review, or OFRR for short. And we continue to conduct on-farm readiness reviews for farms that desire to have a consultation to prepare them and look at and see if they are ready and are meeting the requirements of the rule. And in late 2018 and 19, inspections started, and the first inspections were really consultative in nature. We really came out, and this was also a guidance by FDA that it would be kind of a soft inspection, if you would. That again, we were trying to educate before and while we regulate our stakeholders. but inspections are occurring, and we have that ongoing development of grower training on farms and inspections going on right now. And of course, to some extent, COVID has impacted that as well. But when the rule came out, it was a federal rule under the Code of Federal Regulations. And in 2019, Arizona obtained authority under our own revised statutes under Title III in the area of produce safety, and gave us primacy for training, consultation, and inspection of the farms within the state of Arizona. And of course, this is a cooperative agreement program, or CAP, along with FDA. That's where our funding comes from. And as we move along, the importance of the produce safety rule is that produce is a high-risk commodity. There is no doubt about that. And this is some somewhat dated information, but it is excellent information. Just from 96 to 2010, 131 produce-related outbreaks happened with 14,000 illnesses, almost 1,400 hospitalizations, and 34 deaths. And of course, this not even counting those that have occurred since 2010. And all of these outbreaks were associated with fresh produce commodities, primarily leafy greens, melons, and also sprouts as well, were the highest occurrence. So you'll recall some of these, and these are some of the financial impacts of recalls. It's estimated at $55 billion to the food industry because of recalls. If there's a recall to a company, an estimated $5 million direct cost through either brand damage or the business decline. There have been many business closures, and of course, all of the civil litigation, and in some cases, there have been criminal penalties associated with deliberate and intentional wrongdoing. In 2006 is when the spinach outbreak occurred. Lived through that when I was in the grocery business, and also the huge peanut recall that stretched between 2008 and 2009. And it wasn't just peanuts, it was all the derivatives of peanuts, peanut oil, peanut paste. When I was with the retailer, that it was not uncommon to get 15 or more recalls in a single day of products, everything from bakery products to pet food and so forth. There's an amazing amount of product that has peanut in it. And of course, there was the Rocky Ford cantaloupe incidents up out of Colorado in 2011. And in 2018 and 19, there were E. coli incidents in both Arizona and California as well. And right now, the CDC is investigating 2 other E. coli strain outbreaks, which they've not quite identified yet as to what the specific commodity is or where it's coming from, but there's 2 active ones out there right now. So the health impact and financial impact to not only people and the industry is absolutely huge. So I talked about who our stakeholders are, and under the rule, if you are a grower, harvester, packer, or holder, you are under this umbrella as far as being termed a farm. So we traditionally think of the farm as, the guy sitting on the tractor and green acres is the place to be. But if harvesting companies are also considered farms, as well as packers and these cooler holders as well. Now, some of the things that the rule does not apply to as far as produce is certain types of commodities that are rarely consumed raw are given a pass or an exemption, if you will. For example, no one eats potatoes raw, so potatoes are not a covered commodity, and there's certain grains and beans that are not covered as well. And if the commodity goes for commercial processing, where you have a kill step, then those commodities would be exempt as well. There's certain requirements for documentation when it comes to commercially processed that a grower would have to provide to the processor, but the product itself would fall under an exemption. And the FDA, I give them credit, they did provide an exemption to very, very, very small farms that basically are hobby farms or small, very small producers that only have $25,000 or less in annual income over a 3-year average. And the rule really is trying to focus on the large producers that are pushing the massive amounts of produce into commerce. And of course, any produce that is for personal use or on-farm consumption is given a pass as well. The key elements of the rule is there are certain requirements for agricultural water and the testing of that water. The actual implementation of testing, however, has been postponed for a couple years, and the testing requirements are not exactly in place yet. The industry gave some pushback, and it was looked at further by the FDA, and the water rule requirements will be published fairly soon. But when the rule first came out, there was only one single type of test that was being allowed for the generic E. coli indicator pathogen. And now from industry input, there's 9 or 10 different types of tests and so forth. So agricultural water continues to be an evolving issue with the rule. As Teresa said, the LGMA folks have been doing this already for years. In fact, when the PSR came out, I attended several meetings or numerous meetings with them, and the LGMA folks just kind of leaned back and laughed and said, this is a piece of cake. We've been doing this since 2007. So in some ways, the state of Arizona has really been ahead of the curve when it comes to the produce safety rule, which are basic minimum standards. And these growers have been meeting those minimum standards and exceeding those minimum standards for quite some time, either due to LGMA or even buyer requirements as well. Other elements of the rule, we look closely at biological soil amendments and how they pose a microbial risk to the farm, either through cross-contamination of facilities, packing houses, or directly on the farm where it can be tracked to, or whether rain events where you would have runoff into to fields or other areas such as your water supply. So we look very closely at soil amendments and how they're being handled and how they're being processed as well. There's specific requirements for scientific validation and a validated process to cure your raw manures and so forth. Of course, domestic and wild animals can always pose a risk to the crop. We educate on what to look for there. And also, much like in the retail industry, there's a lot of emphasis on worker training, health and hygiene. And those are all documented types of trainings that are required by the rule. And of course, when it comes to cleaning and sanitation of equipment, farm equipment, hand tools, any other type of tools that are used with soil amendments, etc. And of course, your sanitation in buildings, pest control and so forth is very, very important. And last I put under number 6 is sprouts, which is kind of a little different animal in some ways. The Sprout Safety Alliance, or SSA, they really have the training program when it comes to sprout growers, because sprouts pose significant risks, not only from the environment in which they're grown, but there's very detailed testing that is required of their spent water, environment, and so forth. So it is really significantly different from field types of crops, or crops that are grown house green, grown as well. And the Sprout Safety Alliance helps with that training. I mentioned the requirements for agricultural water. It's required that there's 0 detectable generic E. coli for any kind of post-harvest type use of water, whether it be fluming, washing, rinsing, etc. And of course, there's limited thresholds also for generic coli in untreated groundwater and surface water. And there's certain metrics for that. Average, or a geometric mean, it has to be 106 per million or less. And statistical threshold value, or STV, which is a 90 percentile type of measurement that allows for some variability in spikes in your testing of water. And particularly in the summertime, when these water tests are done and our monsoon rains, it is not uncommon to see your generic E. coli spike after rain events and so forth, such as that. But this continuous testing and documentation is required under the rule. And each of the growers are required to inspect their delivery system on an annual basis, starting with the source of the water. Is it well water? Is it groundwater? What conveyance is it coming through? Is it through lined or unlined canals? Is it a fully closed loop system where it's coming directly out of a well and maybe into a drip tape system where it's not exposed to the environment? So these inspection systems, including the piping and the pumps and so forth, all have to be looked at and documented on an annual basis. And of course, the testing results, as I mentioned, have to be maintained as well. When it comes to soil amendments, I touch base on this. We pay particular attention to raw manure application, which should never touch the harvestable portion of a crop. There is no standard as far as applying raw manure to a field, but there are recommendations that the USDA organic program application standard is recommended. And it's best, if you're going to use a raw manure, to distribute it between your raw agricultural commodities and other cover crops. A perfect example of this is not only here in the Phoenix area, but heavily in the Yuma area, that we are going into our leafy greens, or are into our leafy green season right now. And once it wraps up in April, then the farms prepare their soils and get them ready for other types of crops like wheat and Sudan grass. And it's very common to then put raw manure into the fields and incorporate it, broadcast, disc it in, etc., instead of putting it in directly prior to leafy greens and other raw commodities. And of course, the treated compost, which is used extensively here in the state of Arizona two particular types is turned and aerated static compost. The rule requires that the documentation of the temperature, of the time, and the number of turnings that are done with a turned type of compost that you see on the left, but there's also aerated types of compost, which is a static pile in which air is pumped into the static pile, and the composting procedure is accomplished without the turning of it because of the air injection. But with both of these, there has to be documentation of the temperature and time to meet minimum requirements. And there are commercially purchased compost, particularly heated chicken pellets, are very common in Arizona agriculture. And the grower has a responsibility to obtain from the manufacturer of those commercial compost certificates of analysis or certificates of conformance that show that it has met the microbial destruction specifications to become a type of compost to use. A lot of documentation in our program. And of course, I mentioned how domesticated and wild animals can pose a risk. Every farm has to do an assessment, and you're not always going to be able to keep these animals out of your farm, whether it's four-legged or in-flight birds, etc. You have a expectation to do what is within your control. You do not have to break the bank to put up, the Great Wall of China around your fields. But what can you reasonably do? What can you reasonably do within the scope of your operations to mitigate the risk? And if there is an intrusion, what do you do? What do you do if you find javelina feces or deer feces or other type of feces in the field or on the product? So it's important that actual pre-harvest field inspections are done within 7 days of the actual harvest, where a supervisor would actually work or walk the fields looking for intrusion, and when it's found, put up some sort of harvest buffer zones to harvest those areas that have been impacted either by animals or even possible flooding situations as well, and make a determination: should this crop be harvested or not? Is it best to take the loss because of the risk that could pose to the public? And as I mentioned, training is, we do a lot of this right now. The rule requires that at least one supervisor or PIC in charge has to undergo this Produce Safety Alliance grower training. Many companies send multiple people to these that we put on with the cooperative extension staff that work with us. Right now, during COVID, we have switched from in-person classroom trainings to doing Zoom training over a 2-day period, 2 1/2 days, and it's actually worked out very well for us. We've just had to adapt because of the nature of COVID. So those workers and supervisors need to be trained on principles of hygiene. Also, they have to be trained when they are hired and annually, and anytime violations are seen, those need to be addressed and documented, and that training has to be documented because if you're inspected, the inspectors will look for documentation of not only the supervisors, but also the field workers. In the photograph in the lower right, Teresa referred to tailgate trainings, And that is a photograph of a field supervisor doing an impromptu field training using the LGMA flip charts that are wonderful. They are bilingual and available in both English and Spanish. And again, it's one of those documented trainings that are showing that you're doing due diligence with training your employees. And when it comes to packing houses and harvesting and so forth, a lot of it boils down to your equipment, tools, and the actual buildings. We look closely at the harvesting equipment and how it's being cleaned. We look at processing and packing lines, cooler operations and storage for sanitation. And do you have documented cleaning and sanitizing processes for your equipment? And you look for general sanitary conditions throughout for all of your different zones. Zone 1 being your food contact surfaces, and working your way out to even the outside and receiving areas and shipping areas as well. You have a pest management program. Is that being managed to address whether it's insects or other type of vermin? Do you have adequate toilets and lavatories for your employees, not only in packing houses, but also out in the field? They are required to have porta potties. We look a lot at, your trash removal, sewage, litter, waste, etc. Very detailed areas for the stakeholders. And the last area that I had was about sprouts. I mentioned how the SSA, Sprout Safety Alliance, they are the ones that came up with a curriculum that is really specific to sprouts. And they also have adapted to distance learning and Zoom training. They typically, before COVID, only had classroom training around the United States, but we were able to attend one of their distance trainings recently, and it's an excellent program when it comes to sprouts. And it is required that a sprout grower have a written environmental monitoring plan, and they actually test for monocytogenes and listeria species and the spent irrigation water from each batch, or test the sprouts themselves specifically for the pathogen E. coli 0157H7 and Salmonella species. And they have to also document the treatment of beans and seeds. And the FDA has assumed responsibility of a sprout facility as far as inspections. All other inspections other than sprout operations are done by the state of Arizona. And all of this happens before you even see it on your grocery shelves. Quite frankly, I've been so impressed with what the produce industry does, having come out of the grocery industry. I really didn't have the appreciation for the steps and processes that the growers, packers, harvesters go through to ensure they do the best that they can to provide the public with a safe, wholesome commodity. Nothing's perfect because you can't have a 100% safe, free farm. It's just the nature of farming. But all in all, the industry does a very, very good job of having processes in place and policies and procedures to follow to ensure you get a safe, wholesome product. Some milestones real quick as I wrap up here. We've identified 559 farms. I think that came down just a little bit this week because a couple of folks had gone out of business, but we're really, really close to that 559 number. In our process, we also identified farms that are no longer in business. We've trained over 600 individuals in the PSA grower training courses. We've performed 79 on-farm readiness reviews, and I apologize for that blank there, but we have done, I believe, approximately 50, I'm going to say approximately 50 compliance inspections already since we started inspections as well. The services, as I mentioned, that we provide on our training and consultation side is the grower training and actual on-farm readiness reviews, where we go out and consult with the stakeholder and compare their policies and procedures to the requirements of the rule. It is, quite frankly, it's a fun thing to do. It's like going out on a school tour or something every single day to either see a grower, a harvest, or a packer. It's a lot of fun work. The grower training, as I mentioned, we have had to adapt it, so we are doing it in Zoom right now. We're trying to do 2 a month, and we encourage anybody in the regulatory side of things to, if they would like to take our training, you can go to our website and sign up for that. And I mentioned the on-farm readiness review. We do have a short video that I'm not going to show to you today, but on our website is a overview of the process of the on-farm readiness review. And if you go to azda.gov and go to the Food Safety Modernization Act link, you will find this video.
Hi, Norman. Thank you so much for the presentation. We have a couple of questions. The first one is from Chris. He asked, who has jurisdiction on tribal lands over growers?
That is the purview of the tribal folks and the FDA. Arizona does not do that, but the tribal folks they're an entity amongst themselves. We've got a good relationship with some of the tribal entities here within the state of Arizona. We welcome them into our training program with a clear understanding that we would not be inspecting them, but we've had numerous folks from some of the tribes come to our training.
Question is from Randy. He asked, when violations are observed, what type of enforcement options does FSMA allow?
Well, under our rules, and I'm getting a little bit outside the training and consultation side, but there is, much like in retail, can be letters of warning and other types of progressive discipline, if you would, starting with just the notice of violation itself, and then expectations to mitigate those things that have been found. And we work closely with the growers to help them along in those areas. This really to date has not been a big issue for us, because the growers have been so ahead of the curve on much of this as far as the rule, because it's part of LGMA and it's been part of their culture for some years now. But to answer that question, it's much like, whether it's Department of Health Services or environmental services, there is various steps to escalate those things.